for those who braved the rain to come to beautiful Ner Avram. Me too. Yeah, me too, yes. And to come learn while there's Gishmei Bracha coming outside. This is the time of year that it was Hillel who went up on top of the base Medrash, and they found him, that the snow covered him over. He went to listen. That was the season. It was Chodesh Teves.
We always say, if we don't get it now, we don't get it.
That's right. So you get, okay. So Am Yisrael and Mitzrayim, again, the Sfarim I'll explain, is telling our story. We speak about Yitzias Mitzrayim all the time because we go through our own personal Mitzrayim. The ways in which Hashem took Bnei Yisrael out of Mitzrayim are things we need to learn, things we need to do ourselves. And the idea of Tefilla, or difficulty in Tefilla, is a major theme in this week's Parsha. We mentioned last week already that there were many Lashonos of Tefillah. There's different, there was Tza'aka, right, and Na'aka, these different modes of Tefillah, most of which are Tefillah without words, right, these cries which came out of Bnei Yisrael. So in this week's Parsha, in Vaeira, so HaKadosh Baruch Hu mentions, he tells Moshe Rabbeinu, when he sends him now on his new mission, he says, V'gam ani shamati es na'akas b'nei Yisrael. I have heard this na'aka, which the Oheiv HaKadosh says is like the deepest, groan from deep, deep inside. HaKadosh Baruch Hu heard that na'aka, right? And the Sfarim say that really nobody else was able to hear a person's na'aka. It was so deep, it was almost a silent cry. Asher Mitzrayim ma'avidim osam v'ezkeret brisa. So the Oheiv Yisrael Vapta asks on a few words in the pasuk. One is why it adds in V'gam ani shamati. HaKadosh Baruch Hu speaking, it's V'gam shamati, and I heard. Why ani? And what is this phrase, Na'akas b'nei Yisrael asher Mitzrayim ma'avidim osam? He said it should be that Mitzrayim is ovdim itom, right? The Mitzrayim were working with them as slaves. What does it mean to be ma'avid? So he explains it in the world of Tefillah. He says like this. He says, in Mitzrayim they were both in a shibud gufani, in a physical enslavement, and also shibud ruchani, also spiritual. Now, it's totally human to be most aware and to feel your physical pain first and foremost. And that was their first cry out to Hashem, is to stop this tzara, stop this pain. And then, he said, as they were doing it, they began to think and say, but why are we going through this? Could it be because we've done something wrong? Last week we spoke about this idea of the possibility of Am Yisrael, Vatimali ha'aretz osam, spreading out to where they shouldn't have, which increased the difficulty of the slavery that was there. And they started to cry out to help them improve in terms of their ruchnius and their spirituality. And then they paid attention to the following. They said, why are we calling out to Hashem to help us improve, to help us with our spirituality? Because the Mitzrayim are causing us to do this avodah, right? They are, in this torture that they put us through, this was what brought us to HaKadosh Baruch Hu to come and say, Rebbeinu Shalom, if I'm not doing something right, help me do it right. Right? Help me improve. And that cry was the most painful of all. That they said, we're Bnei Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. And who's getting us, so to speak, to go to shul? The Mitzrayim, right? Through their torture. He said, and they cried out about that more than anything they cried out before. Not with words, but deep inside. It says, Gam ani shamati. HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, I'm hearing what's behind the cry, that's behind the cry. Right? And there is that na'aka of saying, right? How did we get to such a state that this is why we come before HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and this is or there. The Divrei Shmuel was one of the Slonim Rebbe's. He phrased it again very sharply. He says, "Zoi busha b'cherpa b'shvil b'nei Yisrael." This is such a shame, right, for b'nei Yisrael. Asher hamitzrim b'shibudom hakoshe heima yoagormim l'havi osam avodas Hashem. That the Egyptians, through that, were able to bring them to the avodas Hashem. And that was why they cried out deep inside, right? And they were crying to Hashem, let us do Avodas Hashem with the right motivation, not because a Mitzri is standing over me and whipping me, right? But as a Jew should. So this applies to us very much. Again, I feel it often, it's embarrassing to come to HaKadosh Baruch Hu when you really want to daven hard because you got a problem, right? And suddenly, I'm here. It's me again. Why am I here? Because I need your help badly, right? I'm in pain, right? There's a famous story about Rabban of Karlin that one Rosh Hashanah, he was the Baal Tefilla, and at Shachris, so the Shachris part starts off with the Chazan singing and then saying out the word HaMelech, the king. And he said it and he fainted. Then he revived and he continued on with the Tefillah. So after the Tefillah, they asked him, Rebbe, why did you faint? He said, because I remember the Gemara. The Gemara Maseches Gitin, the Gemara is about the Churban. So Rabbi Yochanan snuck out of Yerushalayim to speak to Aspasianus, right, to try and get, it was Aspasianus? Yeah, to try and get mercy for Am Yisrael to get what he could. And he hailed Aspasianus, he said, Shom Alecha Melech, Shom Alecha Melech. Right, he gave him this greeting, and Aspasianus said, you're liable for the death penalty for two things. Number one, you called me a king, I'm not a king. Later, he was crowned within minutes, and he says, and if I am the king, then why didn't you come before now? Why didn't you come until now? He said, that line hit me. Here I am saying, HaMelech, if I really believe that Hashem is the king, why didn't I come before him till now? It has to be Shacharis and Rosh Hashanah, and I finally take it seriously and I come before him. So that is the Avodah. But what it teaches us is, bottom line, is never to give up and not to be ashamed. HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, V'gam ani shamati es nakas b'nei Yisrael v'lo ezkor es brisi. That did it. Even if it's embarrassing, even if it's shameful to come, don't be embarrassed, don't be ashamed, never give up. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is always there for your truth. I heard a story, I think from the Tolner Rebbe. It was a Gera Bacher from Chutz La'aretz, I think from Belgium. And he learned here for a period of time, and he was going to be going back to Belgium. So the day he was going to be flying back, he went to the Kozel very early pre-dawn. And as he's standing there, the Gera Rebbe, the Beis Yisrael, walked by. The pre-dawn hours were his, he was very active in those hours. So he walked by him, and he quickly said to this Bacher, what is the greatest pella that HaKadosh Baruch Hu does? What is the greatest wonder that HaKadosh Baruch Hu does? And the boy was he said that he doesn't laugh at us. And with this, he walked off. Okay, so he didn't understand what the Rebbe was saying. So he went in to the Rebbe's younger brother, Pnei Menachem, Pinchas Menachem Alter was the Rosh Yeshiva of the Ger Yeshiva, and he put his head to thinking what the Beis Yisrael meant. He said, I think he means like this. Time after time, we come to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. We say, please help me. I'm going to try to be better. Please help me. I want to do this. Please help me. And we don't follow up. And we still keep coming. And he doesn't laugh at us. He still accepts our tefillas, and he takes us with open arms. That's a big pella. And that really is part of what we're learning in Yetzias Mitzrayim, that Am Yisrael were in this lowly state. That to those B'nai Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, to that to be the motivation that has to be there. But if a person at least feels that and wishes that it were different, that wish alone is something that's so precious to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Right? That krechts. In this Sefer, they brought that Oheiv Yisrael. They brought an interesting little follow-up. There was a great posuk with Ephraim Zalman Margolius. He wrote Shalos Teshuvas Beis Ephraim. So he met with the Oheiv Yisrael, and he asked him to tell him over something, and the Oheiv Yisrael told him this parish that he had. So he said that helped him understand something in Hoshanas. In the Hoshanas, there's a nusach that says, Koshato zakim mi beis avodim, as you help the worthy ones or pure ones from the house of slavery, chanun biyodom ma'avidim, right? The merciful one, in their hands, they enslaved them. Kain Hoshana, so save us. So it doesn't seem to fit so much. And he said, in fact, the Yavitz wrote, it must be a mistake in the Nusach. You should say, Chanun v'yodam ma'avirim, meaning that you'll take us away from the Mitzrayim who are enslaving us. He says, but now, with what you say, I see that the original nusach makes sense. That you'll say, right, chanon, meaning chanon, have mercy on us. Why? Because biyodam ma'avidim, because they're causing us to come to you, right, and ask you for your help, right, which is an interesting chat. But that idea, among the many tools the Yetzer Hara has to get a person not to daven, is that the sense of embarrassment. Like so to speak, a child who comes to a parent he hasn't talked to him for a long time, but now he needs money. And suddenly, right, he calls up. How you doing, Dad, or something like this. Oftentimes, we are like that, but nonetheless, we learned from here that can be the key to your geulah, not to be embarrassed. And if you do feel that embarrassment, that itself is something very precious to Hashem. That turnaround inside. So that is one approach. The Zera Kodesh, who was Reb Naftali of Ropshitz, he says something similar. The Arizal, it's quoted all over the place and in the Haggadah, says that in Mitzrayim the dibur was in Golus. Speech was in Golus. Am Yisrael couldn't speak the way they were supposed to speak. That's why they explain Pesach is the mouth can finally speak on Pesach. So they wanted to daven, right? They had a ishtokus. They wanted to be able to daven. They didn't have words. They couldn't do it. And many people are in such a situation where you just can't. But it says in the pasuk, "Biyosam beretz oivim," when they're in the land of their enemies, lo ma'astim, right? I wasn't disgusted by them. Lo ga'altim, I didn't push them away. L'chalosam. The chalosim in the regular pshat means to destroy them, but klois means an idea of desire and longing, right? Like nichsefa v'gam kolsa nafshi lechatras Hashem, of yearning. So it says HaKadosh Baruch Hu doesn't reject, even if all they have is yearning to serve Hashem and they don't know how to get there, and they don't feel that they're capable. In Hashem's eyes, that's very chashuv. So therefore, once again, the bottom line is that a person should never despair, right, if he feels his davening is worthless. He feels his davening is worthless, right? We know the syndrome. As soon as you say the word Baruch, your mind goes all over the place. Someone once said, right, that before Shemona Esrei you should say Tefilla Saderech, after Shemona Esrei you should bench HaGomel, because you're flying all over the world. And it really is, it feels supernatural. And it happens time and time again. And a person feels bad, right? So he says, nonetheless, a person should strengthen himself and not give up. Ki lo yidach mimenu nidach. Kodesh Baruch Hu doesn't want anyone to be pushed away. And he says, in fact, if you're smart and you're feeling like that, he says that itself should become the text of a new tefillah that you make. Turn that into a tefillah. You should say, Hashem, please help me properly, daven properly. I want to daven properly. That alone, he says, is a beautiful tefillah. And there Hashem will help him. It says in the Gemara, it says in the Gemara in Brachos, Afal pi she'eino hogon. Even if you're not befitting, that's the whole world of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's rachamim and mercy, and the chen that he finds in us is even in that. So the Chasam says, in one great point, actually I think it was on Parshas Vaeira, that Am Yisrael had to start from this ground zero, to see that HaKadosh Baruch Hu chose us when we were at our lowest point, not just physically under the shibud of the Mitzrayim, but in, whether you look at the concept of the Memtesh Shari Tumah, or this idea that they couldn't even speak, they couldn't even daven, and Hashem chose us and took us and called us B'ni, B'chari Yisrael. These are the eternal messages we're supposed to remember, right? We're supposed to remember Yetzias Mitzrayim every day, right? And we have it in Kriya Shema in the morning, we have it at night, every time in Kiddush Zeichel Yetzias Mitzrayim, we're always, who's going to forget, right? A pop quiz, who took us out of Mitzrayim? Hashem. From where did Hashem take us out? Mitzrayim, right? We know it, but there's so many of these details that we forget. These are the things that we need to remember every day, that even if you're in such a state, and we go up and down in these states, sometimes it's like that. So then, to know that is desirable to Hashem and that HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants that. Now let's look at an interesting Chasam Sofer. The Parsha goes on a little bit, and he tells Moshe Rabbeinu the famous four Lashonos of Geula, and Tzesi v'Yitzalti v'Ga'alti v'Lakachti, and Moshe Rabbeinu says, V'aydaber Moshe l'vnei Hashem le'mor, hein b'nei Yisrael lo shamu elai. B'nei Yisrael didn't listen to me. V'ech yishmeni Paro v'ani aral sfasayim. How is Paro going to listen to me? And I have this speech impediment, right? Because we said before that he came to Am Yisrael now, v'lo shamu al Moshe mikotze ruach u'me'avoda kasha. They didn't have the patience. They were suffering from increased servitude, and they didn't listen. So this is Moshe Rabbeinu's taina. If the Jewish people aren't going to listen to me, so how's Paro going to listen to me? Right? The famous example of a Kal V'chomer in the Torah. So then Hashem says, Vaydaber Hashem el Moshe vel Aaron, he spoke to them, Vayitzaveim el b'nei Yisrael vel Paro melech Mitzrayim, lotzias b'nei Yisrael meretz Yisrael. Hashem spoke to Moshe and Aaron, and he commanded them regarding b'nei Yisrael, or to go to b'nei Yisrael, and to Paro melech Mitzrayim, to take b'nei Yisrael out of Eretz Mitzrayim. There doesn't seem to be an answer to Moshe Rabbeinu's question. That was a classic logical Kal V'chomer Moshe Rabbeinu asked HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and here we have this kind of strange posuk, which gets even stranger when you look at Rashi, and Rashi explains, right, he says, Vayitzavim el b'nei Yisrael, right? He said there is one answer, right? When he said he spoke to Moshe and Aaron, which was reminding him of the solution to his ani aral sfasayim. I can't speak, but that was why it was given Aaron. Vayitzavim el b'nei Yisrael tzivam aleim lanhigam benachas v'lisbol osam. He commanded him to lead Am Yisrael gently and to bear them, right? And other place in Chazal it says, right, to be careful about the kavod of Am Yisrael, right, which is basically the same type of thing. So how is that an answer? Here I'm telling you they didn't listen to me, and he's saying, right, be careful of the kavod of Am Yisrael. Lead them gently, have this patience. So what was going on? So the Chasam Sofer says that Moshe Rabbeinu, in his first mission to Paro, was told, right, who am I to go to Paro? Mi anochi. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, Anochi ehyeh imach, I'm going to be with you. Okay, that sounds good. And then HaKadosh Baruch Hu sends Moshe first to speak to Bnei Yisrael, and then Bnei Yisrael believed him. Vayamein ha'om, it says they believed him, vayikdu, vayishtachavu, and they bowed down. Then Moshe and Aaron went to Paro. That was what we saw in last week's Parsha. So Moshe Rabbeinu felt that that was the template for how his going to Paro was supposed to be. Meaning, there's a story about the Baal Shem Tov. They said that at one point the Baal Shem Tov started davening Shmoneh Esrei very long in the morning. Very, very long. To the point that some of the Hasidim had an idea. They said, the Rebbe davens so long, we can pop across to the store for a second, get a little something for breakfast just because it takes so long, and we'll still be back long before he finishes. So one day they did it. They slipped out. They came back with their chocolate milk or whatever it was, and the Baal Shem Tov was standing there like this. And they said, but, he says, did you think I could daven such a long Shmoneh Esrei without you behind me? Right? In other words, that is the idea. The Sofer speaks about it a lot. Maybe we'll talk about when we get there with the Milchama with Amalek, that he says with this idea of Moshe Rabbeinu's hands going up or going down, it was Am Yisrael's emunah that was causing Moshe Rabbeinu's hands to go up. They gave the koch. So Moshe Rabbeinu felt, Hashem said, first go to Bnei Yisrael. Then when you speak to Bnei Yisrael and they believe, now you go with that power to Paro. But he said to Hashem, this time, they didn't believe me. So how can I go? So he felt he needed the schus of the emunah of Am Yisrael, and they didn't listen. Now he says, even though the Torah gives, so to speak, the excuse for their not listening, he says, nonetheless, if there's an idea, we say, ones rachmana patre. If there are circumstances beyond your control, and there's a mitzvah you can't do, so you're pater from doing that mitzvah. But that isn't considered as if you actually did the mitzvah, right? You don't have the schus of doing the mitzvah, so he felt we didn't have this schus. So he said, how will Paro help me? But HaKadosh Baruch Hu told him this. says, Bnei Yisrael have a chazaka. Bnei Yisrael be'etzem. Bnei Yisrael in their true nature are ma'aminim b'nei ma'aminim. They believe. Inside every single Jew has emunah, has belief. And you're suspecting, right, that they're not going to be believing you. And he says, it's true. They didn't listen to you the last time. It was because of honest circumstances against their control. He says, so we're going to look at it differently. Like Chazal say, Chishev lasos mitzvah, a person wanted to do a mitzvah, but then something happened and he wasn't able to do it. So it's nechshav, it's considered ki'ilu asa, as if he did the mitzvah. He says, so therefore, he says, because we know who Bnei Yisrael are, and we know that deep inside they believe. So you tell me this time they didn't listen to me. So really it's as if they wanted to listen to you, they just weren't able to. So it's considered as if they listened to you. And therefore, if you understand that about Bnei Yisrael, then with that you can go to Paro. And that's what's meant about being careful with the covet of Bnei Yisrael and to lead them gently, because to know what's always truly inside of every Jew. And that is something that we're always supposed to remember, whether about others or about ourselves. They say that Rav Noach Weinberg, when he first started, I think the first yeshiva he started was called Shema Yisrael. That was the name. Didn't last too long. There were a few things until it got to Or Sameach and Esha Torah. And he went to his Rosh Yeshiva, was it Rabbeinu? I think it was still Rabbi Yudah Finkel then. Could it be? The Rosh Yeshiva of Mir, he went and he said, I want to make a yeshiva for people that don't keep mitzvahs and don't know Torah. He said, how's that work? What kind of yeshiva is that? He says, but don't Chazal tell us that Bnei Yisrael are tzemeim lasos ritzon konom, that they all say inside they're thirsty to do what Hashem wants. Every Jew says inside, ritzonenu lasos ritzoncha. Our desire is to do your desire, Hashem. What stops us? Two things. Sa'or sheba'isa, the yeast in the dough, which refers to the infiltration of the Yetzer Hara, just like the yeast infiltrates the dough, the Yetzer Hara infiltrates us. And shibud malchios, and the subjugation from the kingdoms, which is not just a direct thing from a government, but the entire world that we live in that weighs upon us. So the Rosh Yeshiva told them, if that's your approach, you can succeed. Because you're never starting with zero from a Jew. That's something to know about every Jew and to know about ourselves. Again, the Rambam, famous Rambam in Hilchos Gittin, talks about there are certain halachas that a person has to do willingly. Ritzono. In korbanos, but the get has to be given willingly. So what do you do in a case where, and again, please be careful with this, Lamaisa, right, there are rumors that not always true about people getting some large gentleman to use extreme duress to get somebody to give a get. That can make the get possible. But there are certain cases and certain ways in which the psak is kofi nosa ad sheyom marotza ani, that Beis Din can apply even physical pressure to the person until he says, I want to give the get. So the obvious question is, what is that worth? You know, somebody's standing there with a baseball bat and says, do you want to give the get or do you want me to hit you again? Says, I want to give the get. It's not so much he wants to give, he doesn't want to get hit by the baseball bat. So why should that be at all acceptable? The Rambam says, because we know that deep inside every Jew wants to do what the Torah wants him to do. He just was out of touch, and that baseball bat got him in touch with his inner self. And what he's saying now is real, right? It's there. That Ratzon is there inside each person. So this is what Yetzias Mitzrayim taught us. By putting Am Yisrael, so to speak, in the most extreme low conditions. Right? Somebody once explained to me, the Gemara sometimes has cases that seem strange to people. Somebody comes home from yeshiva, his mother, his wife asks him, what did you learn today? We learned about if you can build a sukkah with the walls are made of elephants. Like, what? Yeah, and the question is, right, well, first we start with cows. Could the walls be cows? But then if the cow dies, so then the wall would be too low, right? And you need to be sure that the cow would stay alive for all week. You're not sure. But if it was elephants, so maybe then even if they would die, what in the world are you learning? Make a normal sukkah. What's there? So we find many extreme cases in the Gemara because If you look at what scientists do when they're trying to understand a certain material, they'll put it in extreme heat, they'll put it in extreme cold, they'll put it in total vacuum, and then you can really see its properties, how it reacts to these extremes. So too, Am Yisrael, what was happening in Mitzrayim was bringing out the true internal unchangeable properties in Am Yisrael that were there. And that is part of the gift that we were given of Yitzias Mitzrayim. That we're supposed to know that those are there in ourselves and in other Jews. And therefore, we know that Hashem sees that and values that. And He hears our unaudible cry. And He values it. And He wants us to come and daven, even though our davening keeps getting distracted. Or even though I'm coming to daven because now I'm in a really hard situation and I can't fool myself anymore that I'm in charge of it and I'm turning to you. Whatever it is, He wants us to be able to come. So that is the bracha that we find here in this. This is the pathway of Geula, whether the Geula of Am Yisrael as a whole, the Geula of Am Yisrael individually. May we see the same Geula, like it says in the Pasuk, Ki meitzeichem eretz Mitzrayim arenu liflos, like the days that you left Mitzrayim, I will show you wonders in the future. Hopefully that is the time we're in right now.